Everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Casual Chats. I am Patricia, and I am back with Chris, aka RowdyC from TV
Yo and
Trash.
hello.
So, today we're going to be checking off what would be considered to be the final out of the Disney eras that Chris and I are talking, except that there's a very interesting parallel that's happened in recent years that I'll probably get to at the end. But for now, let's talk about the Disney era. So, over the past couple of years, Chris and I have been looking back on all the Disney films and, from era to era. Now, for those who are new to this podcast, Disney fans like to compile all of the Disney films and divide it into seven different eras. We've talked about every single one of them except for the current one as of the recording of this podcast, or is it? Today, we're going to be talking about what many consider to be the era that's going on right now. Some others are debating that it's not, but again, we'll get to that later. We're talking about the revival era. The revival era consists of the following films: The Princess and the Frog, Tangled, Winnie the Pooh, Wreck-It Ralph, Frozen, Big Hero 6, Zootopia, Moana, Ralph Breaks the Internet, and Frozen 2. Now, I know for some people who are arguing, Bolt was the one who kind of started it. But again, listen back to the post-Renaissance era podcast, and you'll listen to why I believe that is not the case. And I know that some people say that it's Tangle that kind of started this, but again, I'll get to that later. But
Yeah, it's kind of a crazy thing, and it actually can't help but compare it to when some people might argue when the supposed Dark Age ended and the Renaissance era began. 'Cause it seems to me like claiming that Bolt started the revival era would be kind of like suggesting Oliver and Company started the Renaissance era, to be precise. Because especially I think that's the one that not many people are sure what era that particular movie would go in one way or the other.
yeah. So again, I think that in my personal opinion, Bolt was the end of the post-Renaissance era or the experimental era or the second dark era, whatever you want to call it, is because Disney was trying their hand on experimenting with various films because DreamWorks and Pixar were at the top of their game. And so it was a 3D animated film, which was akin to what they were doing at the time when Home on the Range became a massive flop in the box office and everybody just didn't really care too much about it. And then Chicken Little kind of started it off. And then afterwards, with Bolt, it was like leaning more towards a story that wasn't really told in a lot of Disney films, which is basically the post-Renaissance era in a nutshell, in which like it wasn't a traditional story that was told in decades prior. So that's why Chris and I had collectively decided that that was the end of the post-Renaissance era. Now, some people are wondering, okay, why is Princess and the Frog the beginning of the revival era? Well, I guess we should talk about that. So, Princess and the Frog came out in 2009, recently celebrated its 15th anniversary. And the reason why we believe, we as well as many other people believe that this is the beginning of the revival era is because it went back to the traditions of 2D animation, which hadn't been done in 4 years prior with the release of Home on the Range. It brought back John Musker and Ron Clements after they've directed Treasure Planet, after that was a major bomb in the box office. And it brought back various other elements, like it stars it stars a princess, and it has magical elements, and it tells a classic story. Well, more along the lines of a modern take of a classic story. You know, a lot of people know about the classic fairy tale The Frog Prince by the Brothers Grimm, even though that technically this is a modern telling of it, which was originally written by E.D. Baker. But for the most part, it is its own thing in a way, but it is honoring the traditions of what Disney was at their prime back in the Renaissance era in the 90s, which is why that we believe that this is the starting point of the revival era. So, what is the movie about? So, taking place in the 1920s, a young woman named Tiara has a dream of opening up a restaurant of her own. She works really, really hard in multiple jobs so that she can be able to save up for it. She works as a waitress where she's constantly serving other people. She was given the opportunity to have enough money so she can open the restaurant thanks to the likes of of the main rich man of New Orleans and his daughter Charlotte, who they're really, really close friends with one another. And so she has the opportunity to bake a bunch of beignets for this masquerade ball that is happening around during Mardi Gras. But during that time, we have Prince Naveen who is coming over to visit, and that's why they're throwing the masquerade ball in the first place, was to honor Prince Naveen coming over from Maldonia over to New Orleans. And so along the way, Prince Naveen actually meets up with this shadow man who actually turns him into a frog, while the Prince Naveen who shows up in the masquerade ball is actually his butler. And so we have Prince Naveen going over to Tiana thinking that she is a princess because she's dressed up as one for the ball. She kisses him and she ends up turning into a frog. And so they have to go over to this voodoo lady named Mama Odie so that they can be able to transform back. In the meanwhile, the shadow man known as Dr. Facilier is telling the butler who's disguised as the prince that he needs his blood in order for the spell to continue on, and that, he has to stay within the deal that he made with the demons because that's how he's able to keep his power. So yeah, it's a very intriguing story. It has a lot of great characters. Music done by Randy Newman, and also the animation is still fantastic, even 15 years after this film came out. So yeah, I would like to know about your thoughts on this, Chris.
Yeah, first, I guess this movie, one thing obviously will have a bit of a soft spot in me, just for being one of the few of the Disney animated studio films to actually take place in the United States. Actually, looking back, and I actually finally, just as you were talking, managed to dig up the map that people have put together for the Disney film geography that you probably have seen over the years. And I don't have the exact count on me, especially since this one I brought up actually has the Pixar films as well. So that's going to actually hurt things. But actually did turn out there were more Disney films taking place in the USA than I originally thought, but it's still not that many. And I do give this movie a lot, some credit for it taking place in there and giving a shout out. Also to, yeah, like I said, a relatively classic time period, as you said, 1920s New Orleans that this film is taking place in. The one thing I actually always bring up about this particular movie is it's always filmed at, and this might actually get me in trouble with some people, so a fair warning about that. But everyone likes to look at this movie as being another one of those really almost I hesitate to use the term that much, but almost like one of the more feminist movies, even more on the level of what Beauty and the Beast and others were. I'm not 100% sure it is, though. When you really look at the story, like everyone points out how Tiana, yes, she's a very independent, hardworking individual, trying her best to put together her own business, her own restaurant, and all of that. And yet, the thing that ends up being turns out throughout most of the picture is you could almost say that her methods don't end up being right, because everything keeps being held back. She puts together all her efforts to try to put together just as much money to purchase the building she needs, only to get found out that it gets outbid for it. And this is before she ends up getting cursed. And she has to cut this deal with Prince Naveen to, well, but actually basically like cure them both selves. And she already needs to enlist his help to try and help get the restaurant back. But then you go on. There really is it turns out to be more of a classic message of many Disney films that people really let on to, in that it really is I guess the best way to put it is it's kind of a pro-love movie. Was the best way to put it, because especially when she's so obsessed with believing that accomplishing her own self-made goals is what's most important in life. But then we get, especially when they finally reach, of course, the character of Mama Odie and the whole song, Dig a Little Deeper. It's all pushing to the fact that no, she needs another person's love and companionship in order to be complete. And it's only when she finally finally fall in love with Prince Naveen, that the curse is essentially lifted. So it's actually, I've always looked at this and seen that the not just the story but the message of this movie is actually a lot more in line with some more traditional Disney films than a lot of people let on it to be.
I can understand where some people kind of feel that way because I guess even though that this movie is not within the revival era, but it did come out a few years beforehand, and I guess it kind of painted a little bit of what Disney would try to do over the next decade for their films. So I'm sure if you're familiar with Lindsay Ellis, she did a long, elaborate video a few years ago on The Little Mermaid and discussing about how around the 2000s and early 2010s there seemed to have been like this negative connotation about like little girls and about how the Disney princesses were presented and how, oh, a lot of them were damsels in distresses and a lot of them, they seeked out a guy and all that kind of stuff. And there were so many parodies of it. And then comes Enchanted in 2007, where it's essentially Disney poking fun of itself and becoming self-aware of the fact that, okay, yeah, we have the princess and she falls in love with the prince and they start falling in love with each other, even though they literally first met. The prince absolutely knows nothing about Giselle, the poor girl, even though that he falls in love with her and he wants to get married with her in the morning, and then he seeks out his way to find her, and then Giselle basically has the abilities of like singing and summoning animals to clean up everything. So yeah, very Snow White and Cinderella-esque. And then you have everybody around them basically saying like, you're acting weird, basically pointing out that whole cynicism that we are as a society today. And then when you see somebody like a Disney princess acting like this way from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, it's like it kind of feels very alien. And so a lot of people are pointing that out as a negative thing. And yeah, this is where we'll definitely get in this when we talk about Tangled, Frozen, and various other films. But this is when Disney realized that they can just poke fun of all the tropes that they did back then, and basically just say, "Yeah, we get the joke. We're in it too." Ha ha ha. Ha.
Yeah, it
But
really does. You point that out, and is kind of a shame that we can't officially include Enchanted in this particular era. Although it is kind of a throwback to probably some of the even older classic Disney films that merged live action and animation together, doing some of it, especially in the around pre and post war era. But like you said, yes, the main thing about Disney suffered, especially in the post Renaissance era, a lot of backlash. Mostly, let's face it, was mostly driven by movies such as Shrek and the like. But
yeah.
it's almost like they needed to do something like Enchanted first in order to be that particular parody of classic fairy tale tropes, to show that they can do something like that. And then with some of the movies that they would make in this revival period, maybe even starting with The Princess and the Frog, they could take how, okay, the most basic of those tropes that our movies and others have been known for can get deconstructed nowadays, but now we're going to find out how we can tweak them just a bit, but still make the classic formula work in a way, just in a more revived setting. And I'm sure we're going to be getting to that very soon.
Yeah. And another, I guess now that we're talking about controversies, another controversy that was talked about when Princess and the Frog was first released in theaters was the fact that, okay, we know that originally that Tiana was supposed to be a seamstress and then they changed it into a waitress. And then even then the critics were still not happy about it because of its, the inaccuracies to the historical context of what happened in New Orleans in the 1920s. And oh, is Disney ready for a African American princess? Well, you weren't complaining about that when Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella came out, were you?
No.
No. Anyway, but seriously,
And
that
now, and of course, the ultimate result of all that is that we now have Tiana's Bayou Adventure replacing Splash Mountain in both of the Disney parks as we
right.
speak. So I guess
Mm-hmm.
they won out in the end.
Yeah, they did. So, seriously, all those people who wrote those articles back then, what the hell were you thinking?
Yeah.
Oh, God. Anyway, back, okay, all that stuff aside. So, yeah, I actually do really like this film. I think that one of the things that I really do appreciate was what you were saying earlier, is that it's not a lot of Disney films that I can say that take place in the United States. You have Dumbo, you have Oliver and Company, and you have various other films, but the fact that they were able to take it to New Orleans, which has a lot of rich history in there, and they were able to take advantage of the setting. They were able to take advantage of the music, especially with Randy Newman, who is very well known for doing a lot of great jazz songs, and bring in Jim Cummings as the voice of Ray the Firefly. And he also, from what I understand, he even suggested to Randy Newman to actually write a Zydeco song because there wasn't one, and that's how we were able to get Down in the Bayou in the first place. Because, Jim, if you've ever listened to Talking Tunes with Rob Paulson, the podcast that Rob Paulson did, or the current podcast that even Jim does himself, which is Tuned In with Jim Cummings, you may know that around the 70s, Jim Cummings had lived in New Orleans as a deck boat hander. And so he was able to have experience with making Mardi Gras floats and riding around in boats and being able to have experiences with a lot of the New Orleans culture. He lived there throughout the course of the 70s, and he kind of still considers it his home. That's why he was even brought in to voice as Jacques, the boat deck leader over in Scooby-Doo and Zombie Island, which is because of his authenticity towards the culture of New Orleans. And yeah, I think that the casting was really well done. The music is very spot on. And the fact that they were able to play an interesting twist into the classic Disney princesses that we've already seen at that point in time is actually really remarkable. And of course, the villain is actually really, really great. The music is really, really great. I mean, I've always been mixed with Randy Newman. I've talked about this before with James and the Giant Peach and others, where his music just kind of sounds a bit samey. But I have to say that with Princess and the Frog, I would say that it's right up there with Toy Story in terms of some of the best songs that he's ever written for an animated film. Yeah, and of course, I mean, Dr. Facilier is a fantastic villain. I mean, shout out to Keith David for his amazing portrayal as that character.
Absolutely. If you get whenever you get Keith David in any role, he's going to give you your absolute best, and it's just right there with so many iconic characters that he has portrayed over the many years.
Oh, absolutely. Everything from Goliath to Spawn to King Andreas. He does a fantastic job with anything that he's a part of. He's like in my top five favorite voice actors of all time. And yeah, I would say that every character in this is fantastic. I mean, yeah, you have Tiana, who's like very hardworking. She's in like my top three favorite princesses of all time. I'm not even joking, unironically. I love Charlotte, aka Lottie. She's like one of the best side characters in a Disney film. I just love her personality. I just love how just really high strung and how enthusiastic she is. A character like this would have been super annoying if done wrong, but she does it so well. It's unbelievable. And Prince Naveen, again, it could have been done so wrong if it was done like, the wrong way. It would have been like super annoying. Like he's this spoiled brat who expects everything from him because he's a prince and he was raised, in this big palace. But then when he's cut off because he's such a deadbeat, now he just doesn't know what to do with himself. But, over time with his journey of him being a frog and trying to go back into being a human, and he starts learning valuable lessons about trying to become independent and taking care of himself, and knowing that he gets a lot of life lessons from being with Tiana. And Tiana the same way too, in which she's constantly hardworking and trying to be able to accomplish a dream that she thinks that she's always wanted because her father wanted the same dream. But when he's killed off during World War I, she wants to be able to accomplish that goal, even so much so where she doesn't have a social life and she doesn't want to hang out with anybody. She just constantly works, 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 and she is saving up for the restaurant of her dreams, thinking that if she gets it, then she has everything she wants. But there's a lot more to it than that, and I think that that's actually really commendable, because there's so many people out there that think that if they do one thing believing that they can be able to accomplish something that'll make them happy, then that's all they need. I mean, sometimes I know a lot of people say like, following the American dream, but the American dream has constantly changed over the years, and people think that, oh, if you reach a certain age and you haven't gotten a house, and if you haven't gotten married, if you haven't gotten kids, if you haven't gotten a career, if you haven't made thousands of billions of dollars, then what have you done with your life? It's like there's a lot more to life than what everybody tells you it is. And I think that that's a really important lesson.
Yeah, yeah. The only thing I would say about, especially about the Princess and the Frog, is I think I have said this before. Like, it is one Disney film that actually, when you look at the story and how it's all set up and the themes aims at it, it is one that also almost comes off feeling more like a traditional Don Bluth movie
It
in the
could be,
set the way it's
yeah.
going. And I think, and if anything, I think there's one character that really exemplifies like Don Bluth style. It's actually Louis the alligator. It's
Yeah,
like
like
he's like that one piece that kind of adds just enough zaniness to it that it kind of it like I said it does this doesn't come off like a traditional Disney movie, but it seems like they found a way to take like what was someone like Don Bluth's style and apply it to their own.
yeah, I could definitely see that. Like, I can see Louis alongside along the same reigns as Jeremy the Crow or
Mhm.
Tiger the Cat or various other characters from a Don Bluth film. It's like, okay, you have this eccentric character, and he wouldn't normally work in the real world, but he's just so charismatic that you just don't mind that he's just a part of this. It's just so, he's just so entertaining. And yeah, him with alongside with Ray, who is also a delight too. Like he's this little firefly who is from the bayou, and he's helping out Prince Naveen and Tiana to get over to Mama Odie because he actually knows the way. Louis doesn't, and so he actually has his own arc, even though that it's a little bit shaky, admittedly, where he not only helps them out, but he also there's another subplot involving with him falling in love with another firefly named Evangeline, which it turns out to be a bright star. And and I know that some people are pretty mixed with Ray's death when Dr. Facilier just squashes him. Some people feel sad about it, other people just don't know if they should laugh or cry. But I've seen both people saying their thoughts of it. I mean, I personally thought that it was actually pretty sad, where this little character that was like really fun and really enjoyable and was able to help out a lot was actually killed off by the villain. I mean, not often you get to see something like that, but yeah, and I know that some people are like questioning about like, oh, technically is Ray really the star that's right next to Evangeline? But I think you can get away with something like that. But
Okay.
yeah, I think that the message that they were able to do with this film about like you think that you can work hard to accomplish your dreams. It's like, yes, that's very important, but is it really what you want? And is it the interpretation of the thing that you believed it was? Like, would it accomplish this, a satisfying goal for you? Like, and also I think it's a very important lesson about like, you need others so that you can become a better person. And yeah, I mean, I do think that this is a very solid film. It's kind of hard considering that 2009 was a stellar year for animation. I've even said this before when I did the look back on all the Blue Sky films, and I told the story about that even though that technically Ice Age Dawn of the Dinosaurs was the highest grossing animated movie of 2009, there were a lot of other amazing films that came out in 2009. Coraline, Fantastic Mr. Fox, Secret of Kells, Summer Wars, Monsters versus Aliens. There were so many amazing films that came out during that time period. Yeah, I mean, as for like, Princess and the Frog, standing right up there with some of the other amazing films that came out during that time period, I would still probably regard it as definitely one of the higher ones for sure. But as for like all-time personal favorite films that came out that particular year, I'll have to look back on all the films that came out and do a ranking of it because it's difficult. I mean, it's definitely like a contender for sure, but it's a very debatable discussion. All right. So yeah, I think that I guess another thing that I guess we'll talk about is that not you were mentioning earlier that Tiana is actually going to be getting her own attraction. They are replacing Splash Mountain with the Princess and the Frog with Tiana's Bayou Adventure. I've seen a lot of the videos and a lot of the pictures that have been posted up. I know a lot of people were pretty angry with that announcement, but to be quite honest, when was the last time that Song of the South was even relevant?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, come on. I mean, I understand that, Song of the South, it kind of has its interesting place in history, but at the same time, I mean, it's still the same ride. The only difference is that it's attached to a more relevant movie, a movie that a lot of people actually do enjoy, a movie that actually represents African American culture kind of more appropriately. But also, it has it also has a Disney princess that a lot of people really do enjoy. It has a lot of characters a lot of people enjoy, and there's even an announcement that Princess and the Frog, with Tiana specifically, is going to be having a Disney Plus series. So there's also that in the mix. So. Again, I think that they made the right decision with replacing Splash Mountain with Princess and the Frog, especially since they are doing a lot more to the character and, because it's a better movie. I'm sorry. Anyway, so moving on, let's talk about again what some people consider to be like the beginning of the revival era, but it's the second one for us, and that is Tangled.
Well, I'll just say this. I mean, obviously, we're going to get this is the one where, well, first to start by saying, this is when we look at all the movies of this period. Obviously, it basically comes down to this and one that's coming up later as many people's choice as to what was the best film of this particular period. I know you're probably going to want to give your summary of this movie first, so let's move on with that.
Yeah, sure. So the movie is about an old woman named Gothel, and she is trying to find a magical flower so that she can be able to retain her youth. As she comes by every 100 years or every few centuries, so that she can be able to do the same practice. And so the next time that she tries to do this, the flower was actually taken away over to the kingdom of Corona because there is the queen who is actually really, really sick. And so they use the flower so that they can be able to make medicine so she can drink from it. And Gothel is like really upset about it. But then she realizes when the queen gives birth to their baby girl that the flower's properties is in her hair. And so she actually steals the baby away and locks her up in a tower so that she can be able to utilize the flower's property. And in order for her to continue to have the spell work, she purposefully lets the girl's hair grow longer and longer so that she can be able to feel the same effects. And so she calls her Rapunzel, and she claims that she is actually her mother, and that the reason why she's keeping her into this home is because she wants to protect her from all the bad stuff that's out there. Insert Judge Frollo Quasimodo joke here. So around her 18th birthday, she wants to be able to go over to the Kingdom of Corona for the releasing of the lanterns, but she refuses for her to do that because she wants her to stay. Meanwhile, there's a thief named Flynn Rider who goes over to the tower to steal Rapunzel's crown from the palace, and then he tries to escape, and then ends up in the tower, and then Rapunzel captures him, and she decides to let him go in exchange for taking her over to the Kingdom of Corona so that she can be able to see said lanterns flying up in the sky, not knowing that the reason why they let the lanterns out in the first place is because they're trying to find the king and queen's long lost daughter, which just so happens to be her. So yeah, again, a very interesting take on Rapunzel, where everybody knows about Rapunzel by the Brothers Grimm, where you have this poor man who is stealing a whole bunch of herbs from the witch's garden, and he is captured by the witch, and then in exchange for him being let go and being able to use these herbs, he promises her that he'll give her his baby. And so when the day comes when the baby is born, he gives her up. And then Rapunzel's hair grows longer in the tower. The prince comes in and rescues her. They live happily ever after, blah, 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 blah. But in this one, it's actually changing the mythology a little bit, where there's a lot of interesting choices that they make, but they're actually really smart choices.
Yeah. Let me start by saying that yeah, I suggested that some of my takes on Princess and the Frog might have gotten some people upset. Some of my takes here on Tangled, they might be worse. Just fair
Okay.
warning about that. I'm gonna start by saying this movie has a lot of good points to it. I
Okay.
like you saying, I actually do like the direction they went in altering the story by giving up probably a better reason, for, in my take, of why someone like a witch like Gothel would keep this person imprisoned for so long. And it's a setup that really does, yeah, make the villain someone that the audience is not going to cheer for. It's in that sense, probably maybe yeah, one of the best villains overall that Disney has had since Claude Frollo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I mean, other characters, I mean, Rapunzel, yes, is really one of the best portrayals of Disney princesses in a long time. Pascal is just one of the most entertaining sidekick characters, even without him ever saying anything in the movie whatsoever. But then there's this one thing that I just kind of gets at me in this movie, and it's gonna be the one thing that I know a lot of people not gonna agree with me on, and I gotta deal with that. Let me put it this way. Like, I actually did a review video of this movie some years ago, and it was part of my Elseworlds series that I got, which was I was inspired to do it by our other colleague Eli Stone, who did his own series of these. And see, this review video I did, all you need to know is I did it in the style of Confused Matthew, which is about all you
Okay.
might need to know, because there's when all what I was about to get to is there's just one thing about it that just keeps getting to me that I know a lot of people are not going to agree on. I really don't like Flynn Rider.
I can understand
I
that
mean,
because
this guy, yeah, this guy to me is this was Disney's attempt to try to make their version of the bad boy. Like,
hmm,
what just gets me is like I thought, and I pointed this out in my video. Look, Disney's done a thief before, but with Aladdin, they did it in all the right ways. Aladdin was a character who only stole what he needed to survive, and even then, he helped. He tried to help other people who he thought were even less fortunate than him, and that was why the Cave of Wonders deemed him to be the diamond in the rough, worthy of going inside and taking the lamp. Because obviously, the Cave of Wonders was looking to make sure the lamp would only go to someone who would treat it properly. And he saw Aladdin as that person. Flynn is just a greedy thief. He's trying to, yeah, he's trying to steal. Yes, it's from the royalty, but what he's taking is one of their prized possessions, their last living memory of their daughter. And what just gets to me more than anything is that really, at no point in time do we really, to me, do we really see any type of real change in his character. It's always right up to the almost to the very end. It's almost all self-serving to his point, to where even when he thinks he finally may have a life, he find another life with Rapunzel, and he's willing to give up the crown. Does he give it up to the crown back to the people he stole it from? No. He just tries to give it back to his old partners, the Stabbingtons, who double cross him. And by the same token, look, again, I'm trying not to get too political on this. And like some of us were all in the whole ACAB situation of, but this is one movie where they try to protect the law enforcement. And I forget the guy's official name, but the captain of the guards as the bad guy, and nothing he does in that movie is in the wrong, really. I mean, he's got
hmm.
every reason to just be doing his job. And really, I thought the fact that he loses his job in the end to his horse is just one of the most ridiculous things ever. It just doesn't make sense to me. Just when Flynn finally does literally sacrifice his life to prevent, maybe just to prevent Gothel from ever being able to use Rapunzel again, I don't understand his motivation there. It just comes out of absolutely nowhere. He's not done anything up to that point to showcase why he would ever do that, make that type of sacrifice in the end. It just really irks me. I'm sorry.
It's fine. And I can understand that. And I can understand that maybe there was some consensus from some of the Disney animators and the Disney writers thinking that, okay, if we're going to give this princess a love interest, usually the male love interests are either really bland or really annoying. And so I guess maybe they tried to make him, like you were saying before, a bad boy. It's like, okay, around that, late 2000s, early 2010s era, you have these male protagonist who just seems to do a lot of like really scummy things, but if we get somebody to fix him, that'll make them better,
Yeah.
won't they? It's
Yeah.
like, all females like to have a project that they can work on to make their men better, don't they?
Yeah.
Anyway, but besides all that, I can understand why some people really dig him. I know that there was like a bunch of like discussions behind the scenes where they were talking to a bunch of women about like, okay, what do you think is like the most good-looking guy? And they actually like put that all together into Flynn Rider. A little mixture of Johnny Depp, a little mixture of Brad Pitt, and a whole bunch of other guys. And here comes Flynn Rider. This thief who, has a heart of gold. Again, kind of like a Robin Hood kind of situation, but not necessarily one because we need to make him into like a bad boy. Again, I can understand the time period that when this movie first came out. Yeah, I think they were trying to like, do something akin to what Princess and the Frog tried to do. It's like, okay, I know that Princess and the Frog, it did okay in the box office, but it wasn't like a massive hit. But, when you have something like Tangled, in which like it became a massive hit for multiple reasons. One was, a lot of people felt that, we tried to do the 2D animation, maybe it wasn't working out, let's do it in 3D, and then it just made a lot more money. Others maybe felt that the storytelling was a mixture of more modern settings and with the traditional fairy tales. Others felt that there was a lot more characteristics that made it feel a little bit more traditional of a Disney film compared to what Princess and the Frog tried to do. But yeah, it's kind of funny because there's a lot of consensus that a lot of people feel that Rapunzel is actually the best princess that came out of this particular era. And it's a very interesting debate, I have to say, especially with this particular time period where I can see where people are coming from, where she's very optimistic and she's very determined. Again, going into that whole, the princess, she needs somebody to rescue her, and all she does is being a damsel in distress. Well, no, we have somebody who actually captures the person who tries to do something bad, and she uses a frying pan, and she is able to defend herself and all that kind of stuff. I mean, they really emphasize that a lot in the trailer, if you remember this. And they even played different music that even featured that emphasized that's not in the final product. But yeah, I think that with some of the decisions that they were doing, it's like, okay, I can understand that this was within the time period that Disney was being scrutinized with a lot of the jokes that DreamWorks was doing, and so they were trying to retaliate that. And I guess maybe they were trying to do something similar where, you have, instead of this bland, boring male protagonist, it's like, okay, you have the bad boy. And instead of the damsel in distress, you have the highly optimistic princess who's able to defend herself and is able to have such a bubbly personality. Tiana, I mean, she was just a stick in the mud who just constantly worked too hard. I mean, I can see why some people would react more fondly to Rapunzel as opposed to Tiana, because she is much more of an easier person to get along with and to side with. And yeah, I think that a lot of the elements from Tangled are actually pretty good. I mean, I really do like the music. Like Alan Menken does a phenomenal job of the soundtrack. He was able to come back into this. Hasn't been able to do an animated Disney film since Home on the Range, so he's able to hit it out of the park with a lot of the songs that he featured here. I really enjoyed Mother Gothel as a villain. She is a very, very compelling villain. Like I would, yeah, I would even argue right up there with like Claude Frodo from Hunchback of Notre Dame, in which, well, while he is also very manipulative and trying to have Quasimodo stay in the tower because of his appearance, a very similar case in which she wants Rapunzel to stay, and she does it in a very manipulative way that looks like it's very loving and very supporting, but in reality, she really doesn't care about Rapunzel other than just using her for her magic. Now, I know some people have actually made the argument that, oh, over time she kind of did, but at the cost of, her needing to use Rapunzel to stay alive. But I don't know. I never really felt where she actually genuinely loved Rapunzel for who she was as a person. But I just think that that's a really great portrayal. It's like, okay, you have a loving, quote unquote, loving mother who is actually very manipulative and is very, very controlling. Like, yeah, we it's not very often where you get to see like a villain like that, where they portray themselves as good, but they don't have the best interest of the main character. I like that. I really do like that, and I don't think she gets enough credit for it.
Yeah, there definitely are some very good elements into this movie, and they have to be when you take a look at the fact that I think that at least at the time, I believe this was Disney's most expensive animated film ever.
It
And
was.
remember, this was still back in the time where even after Titanic and the like, that spending that much money was usually a death sentence for a movie's profitability, but it came back and became one of their most financially successful. And that's kind of and that might be a big reason as to why. I mean, a lot of people might think that this is where the revival started, almost whatnot. It's almost like this was the revival's version of the Little Mermaid, as far as the point where things really started to click and get back in back and get back to making some level of success that would be able to carry on throughout the rest of this period.
Yes. And again, I think that this would kind of like plant the seeds of what would be happening over the next decade for a lot of the Disney films that will be coming out, where they would try to have a mixture of both traditional and modern settings. They would have, all of the typical tropes that they would feature in past Disney movies. They would make fun of it. They would flip the tropes of a lot of Disney characters in their heads and do a complete 180. They would actually focus a lot more on the songs because before this, when the post-Renaissance era happened, they either had like, okay, we're gonna feature a lot of pre-existing songs because DreamWorks is doing this already, or maybe we're just gonna have like one or two major songs with what Pixar was doing. But with both Princess and the Frog, Tangled, and various other films that they would do throughout the course of the decade, at least the early parts of the decade, not the later parts. We'll get to those later, but at least the early parts, they were going back into the traditions of old Disney films from prior years and having like multiple songs featured in there that were written by previously established Disney writers and composers like Randy Newman or Alan Menken. And so, again, I can see that they were thinking along the lines of that, the success of Tangle was able to go about with a lot of the stuff that they would do later on. So, in a way, I can see why some people decide that Tangled was the one that started the revival era. But again, I don't agree with this.
Very well.
And I guess some other things that I also really do enjoy about this. I really do like the animation. It's very colorful, it's very bright, and I really like the fact that they're able to take advantage of the beautiful settings like I'm sure that going into like the classic storytelling where taking place in a European country and with the previous film with Princess and the Frog in which it took place in New Orleans, okay, we're going again to a much more traditional setting, which I think that a lot of people were missing because the previous Disney films they were going into like, okay, we have the city, we have the Wild West, we have Atlantis, we have these old Incan, we have the Incan Palace. We have, again, other places that are a little bit more contemporary. So I guess, again, another reason why some people may cite that Tangle was the one that started the revival era was because it was going back into the classic setting while bringing in a modern twist. So, again, I do see its perks as well. Um, yeah, so overall, I do think that Tangled is a pretty great movie, and I do know that it has its issues, but for the most part, I do think that it's a very solid film. All right, so going over to our next film, and I'm sure that you're going to be talking a lot more about this than I will, is the 2011 Winnie the Pooh film.
Actually, maybe you might not be because I'm gonna say this right now. Like, I went back and looked over all the films that we're going to be covering for this period. There were three of them that up that at least up to the last couple of days I had not seen yet. Winnie the Pooh is still the only one I have not seen. In fact, I don't even remember, to be honest, I don't even remember this movie being promoted or remembering when it was in theaters, even.
Yeah, there's a
To be
reason why, because at the same literally weekend when this film came out, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 was out.
And that
Yeah,
says a
and
lot
guess
as to
and
how old that movie series is.
I know, right? So literally the same weekend that Winnie the Pooh was out, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 was out. And guess which one made the most money,
Yeah.
had the most publicity, had the most notoriety, had a whole bunch of hype towards it? Okay, you have this little Winnie the Pooh movie, or you have the final film in this huge 8-part epic.
Yeah. And that being said, I get why you probably thought that I might have the most to say about this because, for those who are not aware, I mentioned this to you back when that time when we were at the Magic Kingdom together. Like I said, I do have some history with this entire franchise and series. I actually portrayed Eeyore in a stage production of The House at Pooh Corner at my old theater school, in which all of us, the entire cast of that stage play, just made a conscientious effort that we were going to play our roles like the Disney versions, even though the screenplay itself, was not based on the Disney version. It was based on the original A.A. Milne book. But we did it like the Disney characters because we knew that's what our audience would have liked to see. Also,
Yeah.
I didn't see this movie because I did see the live action Christopher Robin, and I've said that's probably the only movie I'll never see again a second time because of how emotionally that thing broke me. Like
Right.
that movie, I was ugly crying at getting going home from that thing. It hit me that much. That being said, I have look. I did at least screen over the plot synopsis, the Wikipedia plot synopsis of the 2011 film, and I do see there are definitely some elements that I see that they picked out of books like The House at Pooh Corner because there are elements that were in that stage play that I was in as well. But I guess this is even with that, I do think wonder that in the with everything else that they were going in the movies that they were producing in this time period, I do kind of question, and this is no offense to Winnie the Pooh and the characters, who like the original movies and the shorts that compiled and everything are still some of the most beloved that they've produced. But I do just kind of wonder, what did they really think there was going to be an audience for this at this particular time period? And was this just some kind of filler movie they had to throw together? In fact, I'm not a big conspiracy theorist, but I've heard there are also people who've suggested that the fact that it did in fact premiere on the same weekend as the final Harry Potter movie, that was almost intentional. They must have made that as a excuse to try to finally justify their beliefs that 2D animation simply was no longer popular enough to be majorly profitable and whatnot. And that was to be their excuse to just continue on with 3D animation from that point forward.
Yeah. And I understand that there are general consensus of people who said that no, we want to have 2D animation. 2D animation is something that is lacking nowadays, especially with American animated films. Other foreign animated films like with, like Pakistan, Iran, Japan, France, that's not an issue. But in America, it is, where a lot of people think that 2D animation is not as a major serious contender compared to 3D animated films. Even though that at the time when this film came out, that they found the 2D animation to be a breath of fresh air, especially since kids were accustomed to watching Pixar films and DreamWorks films that were 3D. Also, not to mention that I guess a complaint that some people felt when they saw this movie was that they felt that it was too short and that it was too whimsical when, again, the likes of Pixar was able to have a lot longer movies. And it was a film that, they had films that both children and adults can be able to watch. And I think that the whole conspiracy about like, oh, they released this film on purpose to coincide with the release of the eighth Harry Potter film, that's a bit of a debate. I understand that.
Yeah.
But I don't think that that was the case at all. I guess we have to mention this, that around the late 2000s, this was when John Lasseter had taken over the Walt Disney Animation Studios department as the chief creative officer. And he was the one who was really pushing back into bringing, Disney back into its full swing. And, one of the first things that he did was actually cut off any of the development of the Disney Toon animated films. He said that the direct-to-video stuff just had to stop, and they had to really put the focus on the films that were coming out because they weren't doing so well. And they were even talking about like the importance of bringing Winnie the Pooh back into relevancy because he hadn't been in animated film since like around the 2000s when you had like the Tigger movie and the Piglet movie and various others. And there were even some that were like released direct to video, but for the most part people felt that Winnie the Pooh was just a kid stuff and he wanted to prove them wrong. And well, I have to say, with the terms of the plot, where it does focus a lot on some of the elements from House of Pooh Corner. We have Winnie the Pooh looking for honey, you have Eeyore looking for his tail, and then you have, the Baxen, which is this creature that is kidnapping Christopher Robin, and they have to be able to rescue him. And you have all of these like little stories that have nothing to do with one another coming in together. And yeah, I mean, it does follow in the classic Winnie the Pooh formula. They did try to do the 2D animation. I did hear from some people that they complained that it was a little too clean and too precise, especially with the 1960s and 70s animated film and shorts where they were a little bit sketchy, but that was because they did the Xerox style of drawing. It was not because of, oh, Winnie the Pooh is based off of a book, let's just do that. That was just the style that they had to do because they lost a lot of money when they released Sleeping Beauty and they didn't get the funds for it back. They just had to do that kind of animation style so they can release their films a lot quicker. Again, as I said before, during the that particular era, I'm not a big fan of that art style. I just find it to be too rough. Winnie the Pooh is the only exception that I will like that art style because it is a book and the characters are featured in a book, so I can accept that. So the fact that some people are saying that it looks too clean, I mean, I'm not one of those sticklers for that kind of stuff.
No.
I just think it looks perfectly fine the way it is. And the way that the honey is drawn and the way that the song numbers are really pushing the Winnie the Pooh charm into it, I think it's really, really well done. And the fact that the music was actually done by Christine Anderson Lopez and her husband, who would actually do the music for another film, but we'll get to that later. So yeah, I do think that it is able to push the boundaries of what Winnie the Pooh was able to do before in terms of animation. And I also do think that the story is very sweet and charming, just like a lot of other Winnie the Pooh stuff. I can understand why some people didn't really take it too seriously compared to other stuff that was out at the time. And the fact that it only made $50 million out of a $30 million budget, some people thought that, okay, yeah, 2D animation is dead. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to have another 2D animated film ever since. It is a pretty sad way of it going out this way, but yeah, I mean, it's a small film. It's not like a massive film compared to like all the other ones that would come out. It's a little film that it should be enjoyed for what it is. That's pretty much all I have to say about it.
Maybe I will check it out someday.
Yeah. All right, so the next film we're going to be talking about is Wreck-It Ralph. Now, I remember when I first heard the announcement of it, as somebody who loves video games, I was like saying to myself, yes, they made a movie for me. Oh, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be like the Roger Rabbit of video game movies. We're going to have Sonic, we're going to have Bowser, we're going to have Dulcine, we're going to have M. Bison, we're going to have Cuber, we're going to have Pac-Man, we're going to have all these characters. It made it seem like it's so cool, and then when I finally saw the film, I was like, oh, they didn't really focus it as much as I thought it was. But I still like the movie, by the way. And the fact that, it focuses on a bad guy this time. Again, I guess where we were going earlier about the whole Tangled Flynn Rider thing about, like, let's focus on the bad boy. It's like, and okay, well, here's a situation where we're focusing on a villain this time. I mean, I guess it's kind of, it's not the first time they did this. DreamWorks already did this with Megamind. But, yeah, I'm not a big fan of that film. But anyway, so yeah, let's talk about this film. So
Yeah, I know I've been very tepid. Yeah, I know I've been very tepid on on the films they brought up in this era up to this point. That's gonna change now because yeah, this was actually the way more I think about it, this was the first when this came out. It was the first Disney animated film I saw in theaters in a long time. It was one that again I was very hyped to see, and it's actually interesting because I'll let you give the synopsis first, and I'll get into the rest of it for
all
now.
right,
If you want
sure.
to say,
So it
yeah.
takes place in an arcade, and the video game that we're going to be talking about is called Fix It Felix Jr. It is a platform game akin to like Donkey Kong for the arcades and later on in the NES, where you have Wreck-It Ralph, who's essentially the Donkey Kong of the group, where he basically has his catch line, "I'm gonna wreck it," where he just basically punches all the bricks, and then Fix It Felix, very Mario-esque, where he has his hammer and he fixes the building that Wreck-It Ralph is destroying. And so it's the 30th anniversary of when the video game was released, and Wreck-It Ralph is not invited to the party, even though that he's the main villain of the game. And so he wants to be proven as a hero, that he can be a good guy. And so he jumps around in multiple video games so that he can be able to see if he can get a medal. The first game he jumps into is a modern first-person shooter called Hero's Duty, and he does get the medal, but then he loses it in another arcade game called Sugar Rush, which is a very Mario Kart-esque video game. He meets up with a racer named Vanellope von Schweetz, who is a glitch. They claim that she's not meant to be in the game at all, and so she wants to have the medal so that she can be able to have her program fixed. And Ralph wants the medal so that he can be able to be proven as a hero. And they both have a similar goal, and so they decide to work together so that they can be able to accomplish a similar goal, where Vanellope would win the medal so that she can be accepted to everybody, and so hopefully the glitch will be fixed by King Candy, who rules over um the Sugar Rush video game, and Wreck-It Ralph wants to be able to win the medal so that he can be proven as a hero. And meanwhile, because Wreck-It Ralph is gone from the arcade game, they think that the game is broken, and so Fix It Felix has to rush over to all the video games to try to find Wreck-It Ralph right before they get permanently shut down. All right, so yeah, now you can talk about it.
Yeah, the other thing, was definitely the one thing about the couple things about this movie is first off, I think this was the first time that really Disney decided that to make a movie that it was technically made by Walt Disney Animated Studios, but this was one where a WADS movie more adapted the Pixar format when you think about it, because this is a movie where let's face it, like there's always, especially in the early days, many of the Pixar films kind of had a very similarity. Is that it's situated on a very flawed protagonist who's out to try to save his own ego or try to prove himself in one way or the other, and basically has to go on his own journey to learn more about himself, so to speak. Also, I'm pretty sure this movie probably hits a sore spot with a lot of fans of traditional voice actors because this was one of the movies where they really went very hard on an all-star cast to do the voices. You had John C. Reilly as Wreck-It Ralph, Jack McBrayer as Fix-It Felix, Sarah Silverman as Vanellope von Schweetz, Jane Lynch of Glee fame as the hero's duty girl that Fix-It Felix falls in love with. I'm sorry that I forget her name at this particular time, but
Her name is Sergeant Tamora Jean Calhoun. What a mouthful.
yeah, okay, there's a reason I don't remember it, but still, again, even especially with the setting of the video game characters and whatnot, it just they find a way to just do this so completely right, and that you know that Ralph doesn't understand and how the main thing is, sorry, that you can sympathize with a guy like Ralph, who if that for him being a villain is just the job, what he does, and he doesn't want to be known as being the villain on away from the screen. It's kind of more, it's very much like someone who has to portray a heel in professional wrestling, almost, that who they portray, or any type of actor who portrays a villain in a movie, they're not necessarily that bad guy once they go back into the real world. So there really is just a way that you can understand why he wants to be more than what he is, but unfortunately he's putting so many other people at risk in doing so. This is obviously one of the big movies where they decided to try that one major experiment for the first time, and that is the quote-unquote twist villain on there.
Yeah.
Where, well, it is and it isn't. They take it to another level, really, in future films, because I think a lot of us watching the movie kind of knew that King Candy would turn out to be the villain. The real twist was the motivation. Like, why exactly he was so intent on not allowing Vanellope to achieve her goal and everything. And it was very well played out in the writing and such. Also, I just can't help but love the fact that clearly King Candy himself, the character design, was very much a loving tribute to the late, great Ed Wynn, who portrayed so many wonderful characters back in Disney's olden times, playing the toy maker in Babes in Toyland, and above all else, of course, the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland. That was just very neat, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. And Alan Tudyk, who you wouldn't hear this name a lot because he's been in practically every single Disney animated film for the next decade. He did a really great job in portraying as King Candy. And the fact
He
that
really steals the show, even with his all-star cast.
yeah, he does. I mean, he does a fantastic job of being a reasonable king where he basically is explaining why Vanellope shouldn't even be in the race in the first place and why all of his statements are right. But then when you realize who he really is and what his motivation is, it's like, oh, wow, this is actually a really great twist. I think out of all the twists that were featured in this, Disney era, this might be probably one of the best ones. It might be the best one because all the other ones, it's like, it feels kind of forced, or oh really, that was what it was going to be. Really, that was the villain all this time. So yeah,
Well,
anyway.
what makes it is set up at the beginning by, of course, by Felix's backstory telling of course, the character of Turbo in there, and it's done just so early enough in the movie that it kind of passes in your memory, so that when the twist is revealed and said, "Holy crap! How did I not see that coming?"
Yeah.
It's like it just that, yeah, just because of the fact that it was set up and then it's revealed in the end, just ends up making so much sense that it surprises you, but then after the surprise, you realize, yeah, how could it not be anything but that?
Yeah, very true. And also the fact that you have a moment where Wreck-It Ralph was willing to sacrifice everything so that, things can be able to go back to normal, and that he was able to actually get a lot of people really emotionally attached to him. And this is the bad guy. We shouldn't be attached to this guy, but he does such a compelling portrayal of this character that you really root for him, that even though that he is the bad guy in a video game, he is actually the good guy. And the bad guy, actually is somebody who is claimed to be the good guy. So again, they were able to bring a twist into the formula that actually makes a lot of sense, and it feels akin to what you would expect. I mean, it's like that with a lot of video games in which, like, the character that you're playing is supposed to be character A, but in reality is character B. And then the main bad guy, it's not who you think it is. It's actually a twist. And again, it fits really, really well. And I really do like the fact that that people remember it because of the story and because of the characters, and we're not disappointed that it wasn't a glorified video game cameo-esque film like a lot of people thought it was going to be. Like, oh, this is going to be the Roger Rabbit of video game movies. Oh, here's Sonic. Oh, here's Dr. Eggman. Oh, here's Q*bert. Here's all these amazing characters that we've come to know. It's like, that's not the point of the movie. The point of the movie is that it focuses on him who's living in the world of video games.
And in the way that it was the Roger Rabbit version, because like I said, no one knew who Roger Rabbit was until that movie came out. Like it was almost very similar in that all of the other classic cartoon characters in there, yeah, they were just background centered with this one new character created specifically for the movie. The story really was all around him, and that's why it ended up making it working as well.
Yeah, for sure. This is around the time at which when Disney were actually starting to release shorts along with their films. They released Paperman into before the movie came out. And Paperman was a phenomenal short.
Oh yes.
And I even said it when Kevin and I discussed about Wreck-It Ralph, which, by the way, was literally like our second episode of our podcast, where we literally saw Wreck-It Ralph when it came out in theaters and how much we absolutely loved it. And, now that, we have like 12 years removed, and I still like this movie. I still think this is one of the best films that came out in this era. I really do enjoy this film. I mean, it just speaks to me in a way that it just checks all the boxes for me. Sure, there may not be any traditional things in a Disney movie that you would expect, but it does a lot of, again, contemporary things that I really do enjoy. And it really speaks to me as somebody who loves video games. So, yeah, I do really, really like this film. For the sequel, though, we'll get to that. But
Sure.
before we do, let's talk about the monster upon Disney animated films that pretty much took over the world for over a decade. Let's talk about Frozen.
Oh yes.
Okay, so Aaron and I did a podcast several years ago where we looked back on Frozen in honor of Frozen 2 being out in theaters. So if you want to know my personal thoughts about Frozen in depth, you can go listen to that podcast. But for a quick recap of Frozen for the two people who have never seen it, it's based off of The Snow Queen by Hans Christian Andersen, the first time since The Little Mermaid and The Little Match Girl, in which Disney has adapted a Hans Christian Andersen story into the big screen. It takes place in a kingdom called Arendelle, where you have a princess named Elsa who has the ability to have magical powers of ice and snow. And her sister Anna, they decide to go out one night while, her practicing her ice magic. She strikes Anna by mistake and is taken over by these trolls so they can be able to heal her. And in return, they said that she has to remove the memory of Elsa ever having these powers so that she can be properly healed. And so Elsa is forbidden to use her powers. And so we have Elsa basically like locking herself in her room, just being confined, and then Anna wanting to play with Elsa and hang out with her as sisters like they used to, but she doesn't want to anymore. And then later on, her parents died in a ship accident during a storm, and so Elsa now has to become the new queen of Arendelle. And during
And
the
let's put this to rest. No, the parents did not end up in a jungle somewhere and end up giving birth to Tarzan.
Oh,
Well, let's
God.
get that out of the
Are
way
you
right now.
Yes, and oh God, jeez. Okay, so no, for those who are wondering, no, the parents of Elsa and Anna are not the same parents as Tarzan. Frozen 2 explains this, by the way. What the hell were they thinking? God, no. It doesn't even, not even the same ship. They weren't even going to the same location. They don't even look alike. No, Disney theorists. Anyway, so going on to the discussion of the plot. So yeah, it's Elsa's coronation day, and all of the kingdoms are coming into Arendelle for the first time in a long, long time, and it's very exciting for Anna because she never is able to interact with anybody, and so she falls in love with Prince Hans from the Southern Isles, and again, because she's wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, she is falling in love with him and basically has this really cute little song number. Elsa questions her, saying like, you can't just marry a guy you first meet. And then you have Elsa, who accidentally lashes out her ice powers, and so she runs away. And so Anna tries to find Elsa because she's actually causing a severe snowstorm in Arendelle, even though that it's technically spring. And she meets up with an Iceman named Kristoff to help her out. And you have Elsa, who is refusing to go back into Arendelle because she feels free from all the constraints that her parents put her through. So, yeah, like you already know this story. Everybody knows the story. Everybody knows the music. Everybody knows the characters. What more do I have to say about it?
I can't say that Frozen has reached a level personally with me that it would surpass Aladdin as my all-time favorite among the Disney filmography. But I think it may have very well surpassed Alice in Wonderland for my second favorite. And it's dang close to Aladdin. I know this movie it's gotten a lot of backlash over the years just because it's fun to pick on the biggest of all. That's just a situation. But to me, there are reasons why this movie caught on as well as it did. And it's had nothing to do with the excessive marketing. Heck, if I recall, the promos did very little to actually detail what the actual plot was about.
Oh yeah, that's true because I remember when I first saw the trailer for this. By the way, the trailer sucks. Do not watch the trailer. It is terrible. It explains nothing of what the movie is going to be about.
But that's why I think why it ended up being a pleasant surprise that it is. And I know everyone likes to pick on just the music and just how much a song like Let It Go caught on, which of course the big thing about that was, and I think probably more disappointing the fact that, of course, like you said, this movie was based on the Snow Queen, which Walt himself had wanted to do for years. This movie was like literally 80 years in the making, because with how long Disney was trying to adapt that Hans Christian Andersen tale. And
Yeah.
among the many, many changes it made over the years was, of course, it's now known was Elsa's character was supposedly originally meant to be the full-on villain, and her ending would have ended up a lot more tragic than it did. But they basically, when Idina Menzel stepped into the recording studio and performed Let It Go, it made everyone have to change their mind and said, we can't have the character end up like this. They had to completely rewrite it once again to turn around Elsa's character. But I think it worked better that way because you look at someone like, there are just so many people out there that I think they look at someone like Elsa and could identify with her so much. There's just so many people that are scared about being able to fit in because they have maybe you don't have magic ice powers, but there is something about you that doesn't fit in with basic modern, not, I'm trying to find the word here to look for, but status quo society almost is the closest thing I can think of to it. And it's just why I think that's why and I guess some people will also identify with Anna as much, who was much more outgoing and extroverted compared to Elsa. It was just such an incredible dynamic between those particular characters that everyone found someone to identify with, and that's what makes people have to keep going back and forth on going back to this movie. Also, I can't help but enjoy the fact that what this movie did for an actor like Kristen Bell, that was able to get her out of just the shadow of only being known for playing Veronica Mars. And can't help but love that because for those not aware, I was never the biggest fan of Veronica Mars. I'm sorry about that. So just the fact that that was able to take on a new character who's, I think, much more of an enjoyable personality that she could live on. I also almost like the irony. One thing irony, I know that might not have anything to do with anything. I just can't help but laugh at the fact that Frozen actually came out, I believe, 2 years after Scream 4. And if you don't know what we're talking about there is, remember the opener of Scream 4, you have Kristen Bell in a scene where she stabs Anna Paquin to death. It's just the irony that they didn't try to make a scene where Anna stabs Anna in that movie. It's just something I just can't help but get a laugh at.
That's actually pretty funny. Yeah, and just like you were saying before, where you have a lot of people praising the reasons of Anna and Elsa, great character development. A lot of people praise the music just as much. Robert Lopez and Kristen Anderson Lopez, who did Winnie the Pooh before, were brought in to do the music for Frozen, and they knocked it out of the park. I even said it when I first saw Frozen. It's like, you're trying to tell me that the same guy who co-wrote the song "The Internet is for Porn" was able to make a song that is capturing the lyrical minds of 3 to 4 year olds that couldn't. It was just crazy.
Just keep this in mind. Alan Menken and who's the other guy who did like the music for Beauty and the Beast and
Howard Ashman.
Sorry about that. Howard Ashman and Alan Menken. Keep in mind, before they started working for Disney, they're the ones that crafted the stage version of Little Shop of Horrors.
That's true, yeah.
So look, do not underestimate what type of broad range a lot of these creators have.
That's very true, yeah. And we'll get to more of that later, but yeah, they were able to knock it out of the park. Like, a lot of these songs are just fantastic. First Time in Forever, Do You Want to Build a Snowman, Let It Go, Life is an Open Door. Like, a lot of these songs are still remembered to many people even to this day. Like, it's still unbelievable about how these songs just quickly caught on, except for one. I mean, they're always, and it seems to be in this case, it's like, a lot of these songs are just really iconic, but then there's always that one song that everybody hates and everybody knows what I'm talking about. I'm sorry.
I'm gonna tell him. Don't you dare!
Yeah, I don't like Fixer Upper. I'm sorry. I do not like Fixer Upper.
Oh, that one.
Yeah, I hate that song.
I thought you were talking about Summertime.
Oh, Summertime is whatever, but Fixer Upper I just hate. I cannot stand that song in the slightest. It's like, oh yeah, that makes me a reason to actually care for Kristoff. By the way, I mean, if for those who are interested in knowing about the connection with the whole Disney connection thing, is like, yeah, Jonathan Groff, who voices Kristoff, is actually King George III in Hamilton. And speaking of Hamilton, we'll get to this when we talk about Moana. But yeah. The fact that they were able to bring a lot of these Broadway actors into this, like Idina Menzel, you may know her as the original Elphaba from Wicked, and a lot, and and also Jonathan Groff for being in Hamilton and various other plays. Josh Gad, he was actually in Book of Mormon for a little bit, but yeah, it's kind of, I guess, now that I brought up Josh Gad, I have to talk about Olaf. I thought when I first saw Olaf in the trailers, I thought I was going to hate him. I thought I was going to despise him because he just seemed like he was so annoying. But then when I watched the movie and I saw what they were able to do with him, I was like, oh my God, I love him. He is such a great character. He is. He's like very optimistic, and he just has this lovable personality that I can't help but smile every time I see him. Like, my God, like, I really like this character. He's amazing. I really thought I was gonna despise him, but no, it ended up being the complete opposite. He is very lovable, but he's very supportive as well, and he's serious when he needs to be serious. And it's like there's not a lot of side characters who are the comic relief who do that as much. I want more of that. But the thing that I really, if I have to choose a nitpick, I mean, they were able to do the twist villain in this one, and I don't like it. I'm sorry. I don't like the fact. I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense in in the context that Prince Hans, the reason why he wanted to be the king of Arendelle is because he's like the 17th oldest like youngest of the family, and he was never going to have a chance to be king, and so there's this opportunity to finally rule a kingdom. But it's like it just feels so forced, and I just don't like it. I'm sorry. It just I just don't feel really anything towards him betraying Anna when he said that, if only somebody would love you. It's like, really? Really? We're gonna go there.
I get it what they were doing with, and this is where I actually have to point out. I've said earlier how I just did not like the character of Eugene Flynn Rider in Tangled. Another thing that I really like about Frozen is that I think like with Kristoff, they took the concept of we're going to ultimately have the princess fall in love with the guy who isn't a prince. This is where they did it right, I think. That
Yeah.
Kristoff comes off as a much more affable personality and character than Flynn Rider was for me. Unfortunately, I think they felt they had to take it to another level by in this movie presenting the actual Prince character as the contrast, and then realizing, well, we have to do something to end up as to what happens to the prince in the end. So I guess I figured they had to end up, we've got to reveal him to be the villain in the end to 100% justify Anna ending up with Kristoff in the end. And yeah, I get some people thought it was clever, some people don't. That is definitely one of the more polarizing aspects of this movie for sure.
Yeah, and I guess I could understand why Anna was quickly in love with Prince Hans in the first place, was because she was a shut-in. Like, she didn't have an opportunity to interact with anybody. So the first guy that she meets who just so happened to be a prince and just so happens to be a really nice guy and who has a quote unquote a lot of things in common when they sing Love is an Open Door. It's like, I don't blame, Anna for thinking, oh wow, like he's gonna be the one to like take me away and we can be able to live happily ever after and we can be able to live a life of happiness that I wasn't able to do in the palace. It's like, yeah, she was like in desperation for like a different life, and I can see where they were trying to go with that. But then it's like, oh well, he's the villain. It's like fine, whatever. I guess we have to play up into that joke about like, oh, you can't fall in love with the first guy you met. It's like, come on. I mean, I get what they were trying to do. They're trying to once again make fun of the Disney tropes that were basically like all over what DreamWorks was doing back then. I get it. I mean, especially since a few years prior, the last Shrek film came out, and I guess it was, and I think that maybe Puss in Boots would have came out like maybe around this time or maybe a little bit later, but I guess it was still in the minds of people like, oh yeah, we definitely need to play up in the tropes of Disney and kind of like play off into people's expectations. But yeah, personally, I wasn't too much of a fan of it. But yeah, I do get why a lot of people really do enjoy this film. It does have a lot of things that a lot of people really enjoy. It has a lot of good characters. It has a lot of fantastic music. The animation is really, really great. There are just a few quips that I personally don't like that kind of like falls a little bit short for me. But I don't hate it, and I don't think it's like completely terrible like a lot of people think it does. Sorry, Nero. But yeah, I do think that it's definitely a solid film. It's just not one of my personal favorites that came out during this time period. All right, so I guess we can go over to the next one, which is Disney's first take of adapting a Marvel property. And we're not talking about the MCU. We're talking about Big Hero 6. We're talking about a comic book franchise that's even more obscure than when Guardians of the Galaxy first came out. So yeah, so Big Hero 6 was based off of a 90s comic book series created by Man of Action. Now, for those who don't know about Man of Action, they are the collective group of John Kent, Clark Murphy, Joe Casey, Steven Seagal, not that Steven Seagal, shut up. Duncan Rouleau and Joe Kelly, who you may know as the creators of Ben 10, Generator Rex, Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, Ultimate Spider-Man, and various other projects. They also are the ones behind Sonic Prime on Netflix. Yeah, so they were the ones who created Big Hero 6 back in the 90s when they were trying to get their footing in the door with a lot of their Marvel and DC stuff, but it wasn't working out. And so eventually they created Sunfire Big Hero 6 back in 1996. It didn't exactly really catch on, but but then, you have the likes of other Marvel properties in the MCU where most of the comic book fans were probably familiar with it, but none of the mainstream audiences were, like Guardians of the Galaxy. No, seriously. I want to have somebody in the comments tell me, did you know anything about Guardians of the Galaxy before the movie came out? I'd seriously like to know. Thank you. Anyway, so Disney was thinking, that worked out for the MCU. Let's see if we can do it for our animation division. And so here we have Big Hero 6. So it takes place in the future of San Francisco, where it focuses on a young boy named Hiro Hamada, who is this genius and major prodigy who is into robots and various amounts of technology. And so he spends a lot of time with his older brother Tadashi, where he is in the San Francisco Institute of Technology, where they're building various robots and other things. Tadashi's last project that he was building was a robot known as Baymax who can be able to heal ailments. And there was this accident that involved with Tadashi's death, and Hiro is feeling absolute guilt. And he was presenting his microbots over to a professor named Professor Callaghan, who is from that same school that his brother is in, and he says that he has a lot of potential. But along the way, the robots have actually been taken, and that's not in his mind right now. That is in his mind is his brother's death, and Baymax gets activated, and he's trying to heal him, but he wants absolutely nothing to do with him. And Hiro eventually becomes really close with Tadashi's friends from school. And then there's this huge attack that is happening in the city, and it's up to Hiro, Baymax, and his friends to dress up as the Big Hero 6 to take down the bad guy. And so yeah. Unfortunately, this film seems to be overshadowed by not only the MCU, but by all the other films that came out before and after the Renaissance, the revival era. And yeah, I mean, I could understand why. It's definitely a very unusual, take on trying to do like a superhero film for Disney. But I do think it's a pretty solid film. I do really enjoy what they were trying to do here. But yeah, I can see why some people kind of like don't seem to like really regard it too high compared to the other films that came out.
Yeah, look, I'm going to freely admit here, this is another one of the three films that when we scheduled this podcast, I had not seen yet. It's actually the one I actually finally watched this thing really just less than a couple of hours before we hit the record button on this recording right now. And I'm gonna say, I was actually really amazed by just how creative this thing could get. You brought this up, like the previous era has sometimes been called the experimental era. This was one of those the first of at least a couple of movies that, in my view, they continued on with that experiment, or at least went back to that supposed experimental phase, and one where I think they ended up getting it better than some of the other experimental movies they had in the previous era, like Bolt and Meet the Robinsons. And I actually liked Meet the Robinsons as well, but this was really this might have been the most experimental movie that Disney has probably made, at least up throughout this period. And the way they pull off some of the characters is actually really impressive. Like the main character, Hiro, yeah, of course, it's not one of their own creations because he is based off of a comic book character, like you said, but it's almost like he's got some of that of the Pixar traditional protagonist in him as well. As it's established early on, he is a genius who's supposed to like graduate high school at 13 years old, if memory serves me correctly, and he's spending all his time basically illegally betting on BattleBots competitions
Yeah, pretty much.
by building his own robot and essentially hustling more longer time guys who have done it for much longer into playing him, and he ends up beating him in the end, which is also a trope that I always get a kick out of, to be perfectly honest. But it's like he's this one character who, you said, his brother's unfortunate death forces him to have to take more responsibility, especially to deal with the people who were responsible for his brother's death. And it's undoubtedly how he has to use Betamax, and just the irony that he has to take a robot that, like you said, was built to be a healer and actually have to use him as a soldier, more or less, in his fight against the people who stole his own technology and were responsible for his brother's own demise and stuff. It's the only one thing that I think might have that might be some people might criticize about this movie is it does go into probably another trope that a lot of people probably I think are a bit tired of, and that is what's called the fake out death. That, go spoiler alert on there, that it looks like we're going to lose Betamax at the very end, but he's more or less able to reconstruct him at the end, which really isn't that much of a surprise as he was a robot. He only needed, like I said, it was the fact that Betamax, before quote unquote sacrificing himself, had the foresight to leave behind the more or less the schematics that his brother has designed. But other than that, this is a really I found it to be a really entertaining film that I'm definitely going to try to check out at least a second time sometime in the future.
Yeah. And I guess another reason why this film is overlooked is kind of like similar to what I've heard some people say about Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius, that the TV show is actually better than the movie. Now, I haven't seen the TV show. I had heard a lot of people say a lot of positive things about it, but yeah, there's a consensus from some people who say that the TV show is actually better than the movie. And I guess it would make sense because with a TV show, especially as a superhero TV show, you can be able to play around with more of the characters, you can develop more of the story, you could even introduce more villains that maybe were from the comic books. So I can see why some people feel that maybe the TV show was actually better, that they were able to, take more advantage of the setting, the characters, and the plot compared to what a movie could do. Now, again, I have not seen the TV show, so I cannot say about it, but I can say that the movie itself I do enjoy the movie. I really do enjoy the fact that they're able to have something along the lines of a superhero that isn't the MCU coming in for a younger audience. And they're able to have something that's very colorful and has really great characters and has a really great side character in the form of Baymax. And yeah, I do really enjoy it. Unfortunately, very similar to a lot of the films from this time period, they have to have a twist villain. And there were actually some people who were surprised with it. I was not. I knew that this guy was going to be the villain the moment that I saw it. It just like I was kind of like let down with it, to be quite honest. I was just like saying the movie was solid up to that point, and then you had to ruin it with a twist villain.
I have a feeling we might be bringing that up again, at least one other upcoming movie we're
Oh,
going to be talking
goody. I'm
about.
looking forward to that. Yay. Anyway, but yeah, that's one of my major gripes with the film. Other than that, I do think it's a solid film, and I think that more people should give it a proper chance, especially since it tends to be overlooked compared to all the films that came out before and afterwards. So, yeah, if you haven't seen Big Hero 6, I would give it a chance to, understand very similar to like the Winnie the Pooh movie, that it's kind of like a smaller film compared to all the other stuff. But from what they were able to do, they were able to do a pretty good job with it. All right, so I guess we can go over to the next movie. Let's go over to Zootopia or Zootropolis, as it's actually known here in the UK. So, yeah, the first time since Chicken Little, in which we actually have a film that is filled with just anthropomorphic animals. But it's actually done way better than Chicken Little, in my opinion. I mean, that's not hard to say, but yeah, but it was definitely a film that I did not expect to like as much as I did. Once again, the trailer sucks. The teaser trailer is awful. Like, they don't even explain what the movie's about. They just give you, like, oh, this is the anatomy of a fox, and this is the anatomy of a rabbit. Here's the difference between the two. It's like, what's this movie about? I don't even understand it. The trailer wasn't too much of. That's the thing about this particular time period. The trailers, they don't exactly tell you what the movie is. I mean, I understand that nowadays that seems to be an issue with the complete opposite, where the trailer tells too much. Listen to the podcast that Aaron and I did on Ruby Gillman Teenage Kraken, but there, I mean, it could work both ways. A trail, people will not be invested if it's a trailer that you doesn't tell you what the story is, and it fails if it's a trailer that tells too much of what the movie's going to be about. But when I did eventually see Zootopia, I absolutely fell in love with this movie for multiple reasons. So, yeah, I want to go into the plot synopsis. So, basically, like I mentioned before, the it's a film where all the characters are anthropomorphic animals. So, Judy Hopps, who is a rabbit from a small town, has a dream of becoming a police officer, and she trains really, really hard so that she can eventually become a police officer at the Zootopia Police Department at the big city. She has the opportunity to go there, but she starts off as a traffic cop. Meanwhile, you have a fox known as Nick Wilde who is scamming everybody into selling off these giant popsicles for tiny popsicles that he actually got free of charge, thanks impartial to Judy thinking that, he needed some extra help. But there's actually a mystery that's actually going on where you have Mr. Otterton who was actually kidnapped. And they're actually trying to find out who was the one responsible for the kidnapping. You have a film that actually involves with not only a buddy cop movie, but you also have a mystery, and it also delves into prejudice with the prey versus the predator. It's actually a really, really great movie with a great amount of social commentary, especially since this film came out in 2016.
Yeah.
You know what happened in 2016. I'm not even going to go into
Well,
it.
what? Yeah, let's not. I'll just get into like that. This was the last movie that I never actually saw in theaters at the time, and only just recently watched in the last couple of days in preparation for this podcast. And again, yeah, and I will go to admit, once I started watching it, I began to see exactly what so many people loved and enjoyed about this. And maybe even some things that I found enjoyable that I don't know if a lot of people would have seen this as well. Especially what got me was there were so many very subtle shout outs to other entities I really think were put into this thing. Like saw the opener where Judy is just a little kid in her hometown, and her parents are trying to tell her that don't get too high up on these dreams that really aren't that realistic. That automatically got me thinking of the movie Rudy, and how Sean Astin's character, his whole thing is trying to defy the odds of him being able to one day play football at Notre Dame University and stuff. So a lot of similarities there. Then we get into the actual montage of her getting into the police academy, training as hard as she can, surpassing everyone's expectations, and then she has to start out as a meter maid. That is basically the intro to Charlie's Angels, the original TV show. That's the flash I got to that. Just stuff like, but yeah, how the entire theme of the movie is about all these different creatures finding a way to live together in a peaceful society. One part I really liked about it is how, for much of the movie, both Judy and Nick are portrayed as among the smaller of the creatures that all live in this huge metropolis. But then there's one point in the movie where they go over to another part of town where everyone is so much smaller than them. And it just really does, that to me just does a great telling of how everyone is bigger or smaller, different than ever others in some way, and then you can find a way to all coexist with one another. And that's why I kind of actually found myself the way the movie ended, especially, was something that I thought was they could have gone an entirely different direction, in my view. But the fact that they didn't kind of ended up pleasing me. And I'll get more into detail of that. But I think we might want to get one particular gripe that I'm sure you have about this movie. They probably want to get out of the way right now.
Yeah, the twist villain. Yeah, so yeah, very similar to all the other ones. I don't like this one. Yeah, I just thought that this was very forced and it didn't really fit. I mean, they try to explain it. It's like, oh, okay, you have this twist villain where she was just trying to get rid of the mayor so that she can be able to actually rule because prey is bad and predators are even worse, and the prey should be the one to rule everything. And so, yeah, you have Merryweather or Marybelle or something like that, where she's basically like, oh, you have this cute little lamb who's the assistant over to the mayor who just so happens to be a lion. It's like, okay, the predators are the bad guys, where Judy was like, kind of like saying it inadvertently, where she was putting the prejudice over towards the reason why that Mr. Otterton was kidnapped, and why he was acting out. It wasn't because he was a predator. It was because of these little berries that actually was reacting to him, and that that's something that we learn later on. But it was, oh no, it was, the predators are bad, and we should get rid of all the predators. And we have this the part of the film in which that everybody is afraid of predators. And then Nick was feeling betrayed because, he was actually prejudiced towards being a predator as well when he tried to join the Boy Scouts and when he tried to, be a good kid. And then everybody was pointing out about like, oh, he's dangerous, stay away from him. And then he turned out to be exactly what society said that he was. He was a bad guy. He was a thief, and he stole everything, and he didn't pay his taxes, and he was essentially following what everybody told him that he was. That's amazing. Like, again, I wouldn't see something like this again until I recently saw The Bad Guys in 2022, where they played something similar, where every single member of the bad guy was an animal that has been cited as something that you should fear: a wolf, a snake, a piranha, a shark, a tarantula. Like, these are all creatures that people are afraid of. People are afraid of wolves, sharks, snakes, spiders, piranhas. Like, these are bad creatures. They're not like cute fluffy creatures like dogs and cats and gerbils and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, again, again, going into what Zootopia was able to do, having that great social commentary about like, oh, general consensus said that you're supposed to be this because you look like this, or you act like this, or you come from this upbringing. And with the same thing with Judy, in which she was also given a stereotype. It's like, oh, you're just a cute little bunny. What makes you think you can be a tough police officer? It's like, yeah, like that is actually really great about subverting expectations. Like what again, what Disney was doing, in which like, oh, we're not just that company that just makes all the cute little princess films. We can do more than that, and they're able to prove it. And I also really like the music here. I mean, I really do enjoy "Try Everything" by Shakira. Like that's actually a really great song. And I also love the city itself. Zootopia just has a life of its own, and the fact that they are able to have so many sections of Zootopia where it's like, oh, you have this section where these certain amount of animals live, and this section where these amount of animals live. It's cold here, it's hot here. It's like, that's really interesting. I want to learn more about this. And we'll just see what the sequel has for next year. But yeah, I do really enjoy everything about this film. Other than the twist villain, like I mentioned earlier, I think that this is actually one of the best ones that came out of this time period. I really like this film.
Yeah, I will say this. As far as of the twist villains that we've seen so far in these movies of this time period, I will say this one was probably the weakest of them all. And yet, I find myself at least maybe almost getting a chuckle out of the fact that the villain's motivation and everything wasn't going to be on the level that I began to suspect it was as the story goes on. Because for those not aware, the big major conflict that we ultimately see is that, like I said, so many of the animals, especially the predators, are somehow reverting back to their feral, wild forms here. And I almost got the feeling that I had this gut feeling that, oh no, there's going to be this whole situation of there's going to be a group that wants all animals to just give up the modern society they've chosen to live in and going back to their feral wild situation. And then it turns out, no, it's just one person who just wanted to get ahead in their own life. And I also thought, you know what? It's actually kind of cool they chose to show some level of restraint in that department. And it almost a little cool that there isn't the resolution of this movie isn't a major overhaul of the total society that they live in. It is just be learning that we look, there are still some ways we can improve on the relationship between predators and prey and vice versa. It's a way almost like the message they send is there's nothing wrong with our society that we have to end it. We just need to keep improving on it. And that turned out, I think that's about almost as good a message as I've heard in even Disney films in quite a while.
Yeah, for sure. And the fact that they're able to play it in a way that doesn't feel really manipulative or preachy or anything like that is also very commendable. And I think I think it's social commentary that I think still holds up today. That I really do enjoy the fact that not only kids can be able to watch it, but adults can as well. Like, if you're a kid watching this, you probably enjoy it for like the animals and the setting and the music and all that stuff. But when you're an adult and you're watching this, it's like, oh wow, like I know exactly what they were trying to do. They're trying to tell like a really strong lesson that is very mature for its time, and it still holds up to this day. So yeah, if I were to say, oh yeah, if here's a Disney film that's a little bit off the cuff from the traditional Disney stuff that they would usually portray as, like with princesses and a long long time ago and magic and all that kind of stuff. If I were to say watch a contemporary Disney film that anybody can get into, both kids and adults, I would highly recommend that you check out this film. All right, so let's go over to our next one. I guess this is one this is relevant as of the recording of this podcast, Moana, because as of the making of this podcast, the sequel, Moana 2, is currently out in theaters. So I did a podcast with Erin, and we discussed about the original Moana, and I had not seen this film in a while, and I hadn't seen this film in comparison to all the other films that came out during this time period. And so now that I've had it fresh in my mind, and I'm able to have an idea on what the culture of the filmmaking was during this time period, in addition to all the other films that came out and all the other films that would come out later on. Yeah, I have to say that it is it's still a pretty solid film. I wouldn't say it's like one of my favorites among the group, but I do still enjoy it. I really enjoy the animation. That you have the return of Musker and Clemens after they were done with Princess and the Frog, and this will be the last film that they would be collaborating with, sadly. But another major staple that would go on into other Disney films is the premiere of Lin-Manuel Miranda, who actually did the songs for this movie. And yeah, he knocked it right out of the park. After his major success with both Hamilton and In the Heights, he was actually brought in to write a lot of the music for this film. They didn't bring in, the usual staples like Alan Menken or Randy Newman or anybody else of the sort. But I'm glad that they didn't, because the way that Lin-Manuel Miranda was able to do his take on a lot of the songs featured in Moana, it does feel very classic Disney-esque with a new set of, vocals that were completely different from what we were able to see beforehand. So, yeah, again, I did a podcast about this before, but to reiterate pretty quickly, in the island of Motunui, we have the story of the demigod Maui, who is able to bring about the mountains and the land for the people to explore and for the people to live in. But one day, when he was going over to the island of Tafiti, he stole her heart, and this evil lava monster named Ka attacked him. And so in the process, Maui lost the heart, he lost his hook, and he was gone for over 1,000 years. And so the story is being told to Moana, who is the daughter of the chief, and she wants to find the heart and she wants to explore out into the ocean, but she is forbidden to do so. She has to stay in the island where it's safe and it's secure. And then when she grows a little older, she wants to continue exploring. And then she learns that her ancestors were once explorers, but that time had passed because Tefiti actually was, the one responsible for keeping everything afloat with the islands and making sure that everything was in prosperity. But then when the heart was taken by Maui and Taka started infesting all of the islands and everything starts dying around them, including their own island. And so Moana is tasked to finding Maui so that they can find the heart and eventually they can be able to return it over to Tefiti. And yeah, I said this before and I'll say it again. I do think it's a very solid film. I really do like the music that is in there. I think that the balance with all of the interactions with all the characters is also really nice too. I know that some people like Aaron had his issues with Dwayne Johnson as the voice of Maui, especially since he is very well aware of all the stuff that he has been in both wrestling and in acting. But yeah, I think that as his own film, I do think it's still pretty solid, and I do see why people do regard it as one of the best that came out of this era. Now that I've seen all the films to prepare myself, I do think that it's still pretty solid. I probably would put it like a little bit higher towards middle of the road, in my opinion.
Yeah, I will say this. I think what really, and this is probably a big reason why a lot of people still remember this movie very fondly, is that this is a unique, a very interesting situation where it's a movie that one, especially after making the likes of Big Hero 6 and Zootopia, they did more or less go back to a more Disney style formula of a much more epic storyline that's anchored by new original songs and soundtracks that a lot of people tune into the Disney films for. But at the same time, they also still made more tweaks and more changes to what the formula is known for. This, of course, is the fact that is one movie that has a female protagonist, but there is no love interest in this movie. And even more, there is actually no real villain in this thing. Almost like, I just thought of this right now. You have been one of those that say that you've gotten really tired of the so-called twist villain especially in these movies. This is one movie that almost does it in reverse, where it reveals that the supposed villain wasn't really a villain, and there is no actual villain in this thing, which is probably one of the most creative twists they have come up with in quite a while.
Yeah, I will say this, that the twist that it turns out that Taka was actually Tefiti, that actually makes a lot of sense in the context of the story. Where, because, when Maui stole her heart, he thought that, oh, you have this evil lava monster attacking. Well, no, I mean, because he stole her heart, which essentially was, the island itself. It makes a lot of sense why she essentially started dying and she became this lava monster. I mean, I think that that's actually a really great twist. I do enjoy the fact that it's not a traditional villain like we expect it to be. I really do enjoy the fact that there's a way of we can be able to heal what has been broken. And again, I think this will be played off in a lot of later Disney movies that we'll talk about, where it's about the traumatic effects. But the fact that they were able to have this interesting twist that actually makes sense within the story and, sense within Polynesian mythology, I actually really did enjoy that. Some people think that the story is a little bit too slow and it takes a while to pick up. I can see that, but I do really think that when you have a lot of other films that were able to capture all of the elements that a lot of people really do enjoy, like characters and music and all that kind of stuff, I can see why Moana is kind of like in like that third place for some people compared to like Tangled and Frozen. I can also understand why people actually do like Moana, because very similar to what Princess and the Frog and Tangled tried to do, in which they would try to go into the basic roots of what a traditional Disney film was, but in a different way. A lot of people were kind of missing that. So yeah, I do think that it's a really, really solid film. Again, I do think that it's definitely kind of like upper middle ranked compared to all the other films that came out. I do really enjoy this film, but now that I've had the chance to see all the other ones, yeah, I do think that it's solid, but it's not that quite up there compared to the others.
If it was made by any other studio, it probably might be known as one of the best that studio has ever produced. It's just it is a really good film that just has a lot of competition to deal with within its own production company.
Yeah, and it's not the fault of Moana, not at all. It's just
Oh
that the
yes,
fact that
correct.
it just had a lot of steep competition that it just couldn't overlook. I mean, it came out the same year as Zootopia. And and I already praised Zootopia, so I don't want to like delve too much into it, but again, it's like when you have your kin that came out beforehand, it's like yeah, you have all these great elements, but there were other films that were able to do those same elements but better. But yeah, it's not the fault of Moana, of course. Anyway, but yeah, let's go over to our next film, and this is a disappointment in my opinion. So, Ralph Breaks the Internet, and this is the first of the sequels that Disney would be doing, because beforehand, Disney didn't do a lot of sequels to their films. I mean, you had The Rescuers Down Under, and I mean, I know that some people would say about like all the Disney Toon Studios stuff, like, oh, what about Return of Jafar? What about Aladdin the King of Thieves? What about Peter Pan and Return of Neverland and all that kind of stuff. Well, I know that some people kind of count those as sequels, but I'm talking about like theatrical sequels, which Disney at the time they didn't do. They just focused on their films that they would do a standalone film, and then that was pretty much it. Now, if there was a film that was pretty successful at the time, then they probably would do a sequel to it. Most likely it would be released direct to video, but because John Lasseter had shut down that division, um, there was no way for another sequel to come out during that time period. And so, yeah, the first one since, I guess, Rescuers Down Under, in which we had an official sequel to one of their films, and it was based off of Wreck-It Ralph. And so this one takes a little bit of a different direction where instead of focusing on video games, it now focuses on the internet. And I know a lot of people were very, very disappointed. Like, oh, there were so many rumors about like, okay, who's going to be the next video game characters in this? Oh, are we going to see Mario next? Are we going to see Link? Are we going to see Samus? Are we going to see Donkey Kong? Oh, what about Master Chief? Is he going to be in this movie? No, no. Everything that you hoped for in another movie about video games where it has video game characters in it, it has none of that. This time we're focusing on the internet. And then there was another thing that I heard about. It's like, oh, Wreck-It Ralph was going to be released in as a downloadable game for modern consoles, as a classic game, like what like what Microsoft and Sony and Nintendo were doing back then, in which like, okay, here are all these classic games that are available for you to download for a couple of dollars. And Ralph gets the opportunity to meet up with all these old new video game characters. But I guess they changed the story around a bit, because now we have Ralph and Vanellope going into the realms of the internet and interacting with both the good and the bad aspects of it. So I want to know about your thoughts on this.
Yeah, this is one where I get that a lot of people ended up being pretty tepid on this particular movies and the way it turned out. And this is going to be one case where I might be we'll have to agree to disagree on that, because I actually found this thing quite a bit enjoyable. And the one thing I will say is, looking at this movie and also some of the Disney sequels that were made and have been made one way or the other in all of their forms, I think back to this one particular, and this actually might be carried over into the final movie we're going to talk about here. I think back to this one book that I read on script writing many years ago. It was called Good Scripts, Bad Script. And one of the supposed bad scripts they talked about in this book was Jewel of the Nile, which of course was the direct sequel to Romancing the Stone. I won't talk much about this, but mainly the main thing I get here is they talk about how the supposed problem with sequels in general is you can always come up with a new external conflict for the protagonists to have in a sequel production. But it's very difficult to come up with a new internal conflict after the one has been supposed to have been resolved in the first movie. I think this movie, one thing which is why I can at least somewhat enjoy this one, is they do find a way to get around this. First off, there are some things. We do find out there are still some little foibles of Ralph that he still needs to get over, mainly his own lack of not I won't say lack of self-confidence, but I'm trying to figure his own issues with his own self, and so I guess suppose the jealousy of others. But what really makes this movie is I just kind of like the fact that this movie wasn't really so much about Ralph. It was more about Vanellope and her trying to discover more about herself and her being able to expand her own horizons in her own way. I just kind of found that like enjoyable. I will say this, that there is one thing about one very small part about this movie that I always got so much of a chuckle out of that I can't hate this movie just because of this. And that there is this one part in when they enter of course, the Street Racer GTA knockoff world online. I happen to notice one part about the world is there's one location that says fried chicken open 24 hours. And I'm not kidding about this. This movie, when I went to saw it in theaters, it was literally just like a week or so ago. After that, I've been posting online saying, why isn't there any 24-hour fried chicken restaurants anymore? Because some of us, we'd like to get some KFC at 2 in the morning. That was just something that I couldn't help but enjoy about this. But yeah, it might not be as good as the original Wreck-It Ralph, but I just found myself finding some things to still enjoy about it.
Yeah, I mean, there are some things that I do as well. But again, I think that because Wreck-It Ralph was able to get such a really interesting lore behind it, like, oh, you have this this world that's filled with video game characters and all that kind of stuff. It's a foundation that could have been pushed so far. And the fact that they didn't, it just felt like a letdown.
I will say this. That kind of goes into what's worth. I did look at this as being I wasn't so sure that Wreck-It Ralph needed a sequel movie. This was one case where I did think that was one movie that really could have worked even better if it had been followed up with a TV series. Like what you probably wanted to see it expanded on, putting it in an episodic TV format might have allowed them to do more of what I think you were and others were probably expecting.
Yeah, I guess so. It's a matter of if the limitations of a TV show would have prevented other characters from established video games would have been featured in the show in the first place, and also what kind of opportunities for the writers to kind of like come up with ideas of other video game worlds that they could have explored in, as well as what kind of opportunities for characters to further their development after the first movie. I mean, there have been cases in which that has been done before, but I've heard a lot of good reviews about the Tangled TV series, and once again the Big Hero 6 TV series. It makes me wonder about what would have happened if Wreck-It Ralph would have been the case, but I don't know if the limitations of it would have held it back. But yeah, I mean, again, back at that point where Disney was not focusing too much on sequels, it's like, the fact that, I mean, this was a novelty back then, that Disney was actually doing a sequel to one of their films. And the fact that they were probably going to expand more of it, but the way that they were able to play off the internet was again was a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, I'm sorry, the whole thing about like the pancakes and milkshake thing where the rabbit explodes after he starts eating it and the girl just like screams. It's like That is not funny, in my opinion. In fact, it actually hits me on a very personal level because for a long time I was an emotional eater. And seeing that scene actually disturbed me in a way that kind of brought me into a really dark place. I'm sorry to say. And yeah, and then the whole thing about like, oh, all the negative things on the internet, all the negative comments when Ralph was like trying to ask a question to this Google like thing, and then it was like all these negative notions is like, oh, this is what Disney thinks of the internet now, just a whole bunch of negative people just saying a whole bunch of just bad stuff online. I know that in recent years that social media has become pretty toxic and that a lot of people are starting to leave social media just to get away from that, but yeah, I mean, the internet is not just some negative thing that, that just says a whole bunch of negative stuff. I mean, there are actually some good things that can come off from it, like meeting with friends that maybe you couldn't meet physically because you were, made fun of or misunderstood. If you met up with people online that actually understand you, you could actually have a close connection to them more than you can, if you were to meet somebody, from the same school or from the same neighborhood or something like that. Or, even with somebody like me, I met my husband online. And I probably wouldn't have met him any other way because he lives in a different country and I lived in, he lived in the UK and I lived in America. So in any other situation, we would have never met. So this whole negative thing about the internet is, I understand that it can be a terrible place at times, but can also be a good place as well. And they did try to play off some parts of it, but they played a lot of the whole negative thing as like a joke, and it just again irked me the wrong way. I think the only reason why a lot of people seem to remember this film was the whole Disney princess cameo thing, where once again they're trying to play off the tropes about like, okay, this is what Disney princesses are, in which like, oh, we don't have a mom, and these are all the negative things that we went through. And I mean, even Aaron pointed this out. It's like, why isn't there like a movie based off of the Disney princesses? That's the only thing that anybody remembers from this movie. So yeah, I mean, I mean, I'm just more disappointed with this movie than I am hating it. There's actually somebody who listens to my podcast who says it is the worst Disney movie they've ever seen. No, it's not. There's much worse.
Okay, so there's someone who's never seen Home on the Range or Chicken Little.
Nope, not at all. No, or Black Cauldron, or no,
Yeah.
no, no, not at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that it's not the worst. It's a more of a disappointing film in my opinion, but it's not the worst.
I will say, ironically, even though I said it would probably work best in the TV series, it is one movie that I'm going to confess at some point in time I did think up the concept for a possible third Wreck-It Ralph movie in which it's very attentive. It's very choppy and everything, but it would basically have involved Ralph meeting up with having to confront a future version of himself from a sequel video game of his where he was the hero, kind of throwing in a whole Donkey Kong Country situation and how he would more or less deal with that. I guess it was just a dumb idea in my book that I sometimes come up when I can't think about anything else.
Well, I mean, I'm sure that in some universe it probably could have worked, but who knows? I mean, maybe you'll try to, do it in a different way. But yeah, in the meanwhile, Wreck-It Ralph breaks the internet. In my opinion, a bit of a letdown. But if you enjoy this movie, just like Chris has, then good on you. Enjoy it. But yeah, if you're like me who did not care for this movie, you're not alone. You're not alone. All right. So yeah, let's wrap things up with our last movie, which is Frozen 2, which once again, I did talk about this in a previous podcast. I talked about it when the movie came out and I coincided it with the original Frozen. So yeah, so basically it takes place years after the original Frozen, and Elsa hears this chanting that she has to go over to a different part of the world, and there's a lot of mysteries that are solved involving with what happened to her parents parents and her real destiny. And you also have another subplot involving with Kristoff wanting to propose to Anna to marry him, very similar to what Mr. Bernard tried to do in Rescuers Down Under, in which he wanted to propose to Miss Bianca. Yeah, I hadn't seen this film since I saw it in theaters 5 years ago, and I've actually heard a lot of people saying about how the production of this film was actually very problematic and how they were actually rushing this film and it wasn't like completely finished to what they wanted because still to that point, Frozen was still very, very popular amongst young girls and a lot of viewers, and there was a lot of hype for Frozen 2. And so a lot of people felt that it wasn't as good as the first film. Yeah, I do agree as well, but I do think that despite of what happened behind the scenes, I do still think that there are some things that they actually did get right in this.
Maybe I'm going to confess this is probably the movie that may have, especially as far as the sequel movies go, may have been the biggest disappointment for me.
Okay.
Like you, I have really only saw this movie once in theaters, and the unfortunate thing is, I for the life of me can barely remember any of it other than the ending itself, where of course Elsa chooses to live in the land where her parents originally came from, and Anna becomes the queen of Arendelle. That's basically almost all I remember about. And I think it comes down to this, is that this is one movie where I will admit it was probably the most likely to get a sequel because of how tremendous the first movie was. But it's also probably the one that didn't need a sequel equal
Yeah.
the most because of how tremendous the first one was. The first
Right.
move, because for me, the first movie had such a finality of the resolution that I just don't see how it goes back to what I said earlier about the whole issue about when you make a sequel to a movie, it's so difficult to create a new internal conflict for the main characters. The internal conflicts of the main characters in the first movie have been so resolved, so final, that I don't see how you what yeah, it is near impossible to create a new story about this. And this is what I think to me is probably the number one indication that it just didn't hit as well as the first one. I happen to be a big fan, regular attendee of Disney on Ice. Anytime it's in the area of my part of North Texas, I try to go see it. And in fact, it seems like every single year that Disney on Ice comes to the DFW suburb of Allen, Texas on the Thanksgiving weekend. So I actually got to see it on the Sunday after Thanksgiving. The show they put on this year was both Frozen and Encanto. And what I just realized in the days leading up to this podcast is, to this day, Frozen remains a very big part of the Disney on Ice series. Frozen 2 isn't. And I think that really just says a lot as to just how much the original really hit in a way with so many people that I just don't see any follow-ups to it are going to be able to make that much of an impact as the first one did.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And I also think that there are some things that just feel a little bit weaker compared to the original. I guess the only thing that I really did enjoy about that movie was once again Olaf. I mean, there's just so many like quotable lines that he just says in that movie that there's busted up Aaron and I when we first saw it in theaters. And it's funny because, when he was like yelling at all the names and, he said Stephanie, there was actually somebody who was sitting right in front of us whose name was Stephanie. It's like, who? Why are they calling me? So Aaron and I just thought that that was actually pretty hilarious. And then of course when he was when Olaf was recapping the first movie and everybody was like getting invested, it's like, oh yeah, that's actually pretty hilarious. And again, I know the whole twist thing, I was starting to get a little bit tired of it. And yeah, I guess it kind of makes sense in the context of the story that it turned out that, that Elsa and Anna's grandfather was actually the villain inadvertently in this movie, and why those people were trapped in that in that island in the first place. It's like, and then there was this whole prejudice thing, and now the Arendelle is going to be destroyed. It's like, Yeah, I mean, they were trying to build up all the loose ends from the first movie, but in a way, it just kind of made it feel worse. It's like, oh yeah, they're trying to add a whole bunch of lore into the story. It's like, okay, this is where Elsa and Anna's parents were this entire time. They were trying to go here and they were trying to do this, and it's like, yeah, but is it really necessary for us to know all that kind of stuff? I mean, why not just like, build onto something as opposed to like, trying to add a whole bunch of things that weren't in the first movie. Again, this
It's
is what I had
almost
an issue with Wreck-It Ralph Breaks the Internet.
it's almost like I think I mean, maybe this is just my wild guess, but it's almost like they felt they had to throw all of that in order to squash all of the Disney theorists that were trying to tie all those movies together with their whole loop into saying that yeah, Elsa's parents were also Tarzan's parents and all that stuff.
Mm. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised considering of how Disney just loves to throw their theories together. And I think that probably Matt Pat wasn't helping much when he was like saying about like, oh, all these characters are connected in this way because reasons and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I guess that maybe it kind of like sounds like a very similar story from what I've heard about in Game of Thrones, in which like, oh yeah, the fans already know about what's going to happen. We need to throw in an unexpected twist because they already figured it out, and we want them to know that we can subvert their expectations because we were able to shock them the first time. But it ends up making it worse because it becomes incoherent, it becomes confusing, and it just feels like unnecessary pandering. So, yeah, I mean, other than just a few things that I actually did enjoy about Frozen 2, like I did enjoy some of the songs and I enjoyed some of the moments with Olaf and some of the other characters, but yeah, I would and the ending of course, but other than that, I do still think it's kind of like a very weak sequel. I definitely put it a little bit below. I still think that Ralph Breaks the Internet is pretty below, but I think that Frozen 2 is probably like second worst film that came out during that time period. But despite all that, despite it my in our opinions being like one of the worst that came out in this time period, it actually made the most amount of money at that particular time period. It was at one point the highest grossing animated film of all time until the Lion King remake came out. And then just recently, Inside Out 2 defeated it. So for the longest time, it was a major box office hit. And this is where we end the revival era. And now, for all this time, people are wondering, why are you stopping here? There's more movies for you to cover. Well, I have my reasons. Well, number one is for that reason that it was one of the biggest hits. And I think it's a good way to end it off, considering that during this particular time period, Disney was on a roll once again where they were delivering hit after hit after hit after hit. Well, a lot of changes happened in 2019. A lot of major people started leaving, including Bob Iger, who was replaced by Bob Chapek. And then a thing happened a year later that pretty much changed not only Disney, but the entire world: COVID. And this is where a lot of the changes involving with how distribution happened, where Disney Plus became a thing, and a lot of the different structures of the movies were changing, and a lot of the people were, changing their directions as well. And so I, in no way, can have the proper heart to continue on at this point in time knowing about the massive changes that was happening with this particular time period, because um every single era that we've covered, a major event happened. From the golden age to the wartime era, we had World War II. From the wartime era all the way up until the silver era was Disney's death. From the silver era all the way up into what people would say maybe the bronze era, we have the passing of the torch of the nine old men over to the new animators. Or if you want to go into the Bronze Era all the way up into the Renaissance era, in which, a lot of the films that they were releasing were not major hits, and they were doing a lot of experimentation until eventually they went back to basics with The Little Mermaid. From the Renaissance era all the way until the post-Renaissance era, you have the rise of 3D animation. From the post-Renaissance era all the way up until this point in the revival era, you have Disney going back into basics. So again, I think that this is a reason why I say it stops right here, because a lot of major changes happened during after 2019. And so we'll talk about that when, in our opinion, when that particular era is over. But I think that it's going to be continuing on for a little while longer, so please be patient for our discussion of the post-revival era. But until then, Chris, I want to thank you so much for coming on to the podcast.
Absolutely. As I've said before, what can I say except you're welcome?
Thank you. So, please plug and promote your stuff.
Oh, yes. I'm sure that later on this December will be the final TV trash of the years. We're going to be taking a look at one of the most drab and probably controversial adaptations of Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol, which is the 2019 BBC FX miniseries movie that came out here. Shout out to Steve Kidd for requesting that I take a look at this thing. He will also be making a cameo appearance in the movie, so in the review. So that should be coming up at just around the Christmas time of this year. And there's a lot to look forward to, as in the first, just keep in mind, in the first 3 months of 2025, you will be celebrating both the 15th anniversary of TV Trash and then the 350th episode. So that's to look forward to in the next few months.
All right. And yeah, as for me, you can check out my stuff at oldschoollane.net, youtube.com/oldschoollane. I'm on Blue Sky, Mastodon, Instagram. You can check me out over there. You can check out the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, all those places. New episodes will go there first, but then they'll go in a few days on YouTube. This will probably be the last, one of the last times in which that'll happen, because after 2025, I'm going to be releasing it on YouTube first, and then I'll start releasing it on the podcast sites, because I've noticed that I get a lot more listens on YouTube than compared to my podcast feed, where I usually use my podcast feed as backup, even though I've been using my podcast feed for the past 5 years at this point, and I've gotten over 200 subscribers and over 50,000 listens. It's still not my main source of where I get my listens, compared to my now 14,000 listeners and my 4.5 million listens and views. So yeah, I'm changing it up in 2025, where now you're going to be able to watch the podcast on YouTube first, and then you can listen to it on the podcast feed. But throughout 2024, we have been getting a lot more listens and a lot more subscribers, so we thank you so much for that. Please continue to do so. But we are doing some massive changes for 2025. I'm going to be releasing a brand new YouTube trailer, so stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let us know in the comments below about your thoughts of the Disney revival era. What were your favorites? What were your least favorites? Do you even agree with our sentiments? Do you disagree? Or you know what? I'm actually curious. Do you agree that, in my opinion, that the revival era started with Princess and the Frog and it ended in Frozen 2? Do you think it's still going on? Or do you think it ended even before Frozen 2? I'm curious to know. Thank you so much for listening. Hope to see you around soon, and take care.